For 47 days, the sticking point that derailed every serious attempt to end this war was not enriched uranium in fortified tunnels beneath Iranian mountains. It was not the Strait of Hormuz. It was not the naval blockade or the 10 ships turned back or the $450 million per day in lost oil revenue. It was a place most Americans could not find on a map until 6 weeks ago. Lebanon, specifically a militant organization inside Lebanon that Iran has spent 40 years building, arming, funding, and treating as its most important strategic asset outside its own borders. Last night, something happened that nobody predicted was achievable in this war. The fighting in Lebanon stopped. Donald Trump announced that Israel and Lebanon had agreed to a 10-day ceasefire beginning at 5 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday. And across Beirut, gunshots rang out into the night sky, not in anger, in genuine celebration of something that seemed impossible 48 hours ago. What happened in the hours before that announcement and what it now means for the 4 days remaining before the U.S.-Iran ceasefire expires on April 21st is what tonight's report is entirely about. If you are not yet subscribed to BBU News, do it right now. Hit the bell, because the next 4 days will move faster than any single news cycle can keep up with. You need to be here when this breaks. Good evening. I'm Caitlin Collins. Welcome to BBU News. We are 4 days from April 21st, the expiry of the ceasefire that has been the only thing preventing the resumption of the most intensive bombing campaign since the Second World War. Tonight, across 7 segments, I'm going to walk you through exactly why the Lebanon ceasefire is potentially the most strategically significant development since the Pakistani ceasefire of April 8th, what it removes from Iran's list of demands, what nuclear signals are now coming out of Tehran that were not there 2 weeks ago, what Pakistan's field marshal did in Tehran this week, and what Iran's internal debate between hardliners and pragmatists will decide about whether a second round of talks happens before the clock runs out. 4 days. Let's get into it. To understand why the Lebanon ceasefire is so significant, you have to go back to the moment the Islamabad talks collapsed. Vance left after 21 hours. He gave his 4-minute press conference. He boarded Air Force Two, and in all the analysis that followed, one factor received far less attention than it deserved. Al Jazeera's correspondent, citing sources close to the mediation, confirmed something that had been hinted at in various diplomatic channels, but never stated directly in one place. The Lebanon ceasefire was a demand from Iran. Iran had communicated that it wanted a deal and could have agreed to one, but the fighting in Lebanon needed to stop first. This confirmation matters enormously, because it means the Islamabad talks did not fail primarily because of the nuclear question or the Hormuz question or the sanctions question. They failed partly because Israel was simultaneously killing hundreds of people in Lebanon during the talks themselves, and Iran's negotiators arrived carrying instructions that included a condition their American counterparts were either unable or unwilling to fulfill: stop Israel in Lebanon. Iran's position on Lebanon was never purely emotional. It was strategic. Hezbollah is not just an ally. It is the centerpiece of the resistance front that Iran has built over 4 decades as its primary deterrent against exactly the kind of military campaign the United States and Israel launched on February 28th. Hezbollah's missile arsenal, its trained fighters, its intelligence network, its capacity to strike northern Israel and U.S. assets across the region. This represents an investment of billions of Iranian dollars and decades of Iranian military expertise. When Israel launched Operation Eternal Darkness on April 8th, the same day the ceasefire took effect and killed over 300 people, including dozens of civilians in Beirut, it was not just striking Hezbollah fighters. It was threatening to eliminate the proxy force that Iran considers its most capable strategic deterrent. Iran's insistence that Lebanon be included in the ceasefire was not, as some American commentators framed it, a cynical maneuver to protect a terrorist organization. It was an expression of a strategic calculation. Any deal that leaves Iran's most capable regional ally being destroyed while Iran is simultaneously blockaded, economically strangled, and militarily degraded is not a deal Iran can accept without losing the strategic position that makes any future deterrence credible. From April 8th to April 16th, that calculation held. Every attempt to advance U.S.-Iran diplomacy ran into Lebanon as the wall that stopped progress. And then yesterday, Trump moved the wall. Trump called Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. He called Lebanese President Joseph Aoun, and he announced that Israel and Lebanon had agreed to a 10-day ceasefire. Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam welcomed it immediately, calling it a central Lebanese demand pursued since the first day of the war. Hezbollah lawmaker Ibrahim al-Musawi told AFP the group would respect the ceasefire if Israeli attacks fully stopped. The celebrations in Beirut were genuine, a population that has been living under bombardment for weeks, waking up to gunfire aimed at the sky instead of incoming shells. But here is what makes the Lebanon ceasefire diplomatically complex rather than simply positive. The State Department confirmed that Israel retains the right to carry out strikes in Lebanon in self-defense at any time under this agreement. Netanyahu said Israeli forces would remain in Lebanon within what he described as an extensive security zone. He said he wants Hezbollah dismantled as part of any future agreement with Lebanon. Trump later said the Lebanese government would work with Hezbollah to achieve that goal, a formulation that papers over the fact that Lebanon's government and Hezbollah have historically maintained a complicated and often adversarial relationship. These carve-outs mean the Lebanon ceasefire is not a full removal of Iran's Lebanon concern. It is a temporary pause in the most acute dimension of that concern, the continuous killing that was making it politically impossible for Iranian negotiators to make any concession while their population watched Beirut burn. Whether Iran accepts this pause as sufficient to resume serious talks on the nuclear and Hormuz questions, that is the question the next 4 days will answer. The nuclear signals coming out of Tehran in the last 48 hours suggest movement that was not visible 2 weeks ago. PBS News, citing U.S. officials familiar with the Pakistani mediation track, reported that Iranian negotiators offered during back-channel discussions to suspend uranium enrichment for 5 years. 5 years. Not permanently, not the complete dismantlement of the enrichment program that Trump demanded at Islamabad and that Iran refused as a condition of any deal, but a 5-year pause on active enrichment combined with appropriate IAEA verification would represent a more significant nuclear concession than anything Iran agreed to in the 2015 JCPOA. At the same time, Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei said publicly that Iran is open to discussing the type and level of its uranium enrichment. He confirmed that Iran's position, based on its needs, is that it must be able to continue enrichment. But the phrase discussing type and level is not the same as the flat refusal Iran maintained throughout the Islamabad talks. It is diplomatic language for, we are prepared to negotiate the specifics of what enrichment looks like under a new framework. That is movement. Cautious, conditional, not yet binding movement, but movement that did not exist at any previous point in this war. These nuclear signals, combined with the Lebanon ceasefire, create for the first time since February 28th a diplomatic environment where both of Iran's core non-negotiable public conditions have been partially addressed. Lebanon is no longer being continuously bombed. The nuclear question has shifted from Iran saying no enrichment discussions to Iran saying let us discuss type and level. Neither of these is a full concession to American demands. The United States wants complete and permanent dismantlement of Iran's enrichment capability. Iran is offering a 5-year pause. The United States wanted Lebanon outside the ceasefire framework. Iran wanted Lebanon fully covered. The 10-day truce lands somewhere in the middle. These are not the positions of two sides that have agreed on anything, but they are the positions of two sides that have each moved enough to make a conversation possible, in a way that was not true 4 days ago. While the diplomatic signals are cautiously moving forward, the pressure instruments are operating at full intensity. The U.S. Navy's blockade of Iranian ports has now turned back 13 ships. General Kaney confirmed that more than 10,000 sailors, Marines, and airmen, along with over a dozen ships and dozens of aircraft, are actively enforcing the blockade. He warned in language that was not diplomatic. Defense Secretary Hegseth stood at the same podium and said the blockade is the polite way this could go. He explicitly described the alternative, blockade and bombs dropping on infrastructure, power, and energy. These are not abstract warnings. They are operational descriptions of what U.S. Central Command has on standby. Hegseth also confirmed the blockade will continue for as long as it takes and that U.S. forces remain ready to resume major combat operations at literally a moment's notice. General Kaney added that U.S. forces could expand ship interceptions beyond the Middle East into the Pacific if any nation provides material support to Iran, a statement aimed directly at China without naming it. Meanwhile, Iran's economy is in a state of progressive shutdown. This week, Iran stopped all petrochemical exports. An order dated April 13th from Iran's Director of Development of Petrochemical Industries told the managing directors of Iranian petrochemical companies to halt all exports, citing the country being in a war situation. The internet has been blacked out for over 1,000 hours, costing $35 million per day in digital economy losses. Oil revenue is blocked. Petrochemical exports are halted. The rial is experiencing hyperinflation. The government's ability to pay its own military and civil servants is under strain that has no historical precedent since the 1980s war with Iraq. And in the middle of all of this, Pakistan is holding the center. Field Marshal Asim Munir flew to Tehran on April 15th. He was received at the airport by Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi himself, a formal public greeting. The significance of that image cannot be overstated. Araghchi is the same man who led Iran's negotiating team through every diplomatic round since the Omani talks of April 2025. His presence at the airport to personally welcome Pakistan's army chief signals that Tehran is treating this mediation track as serious and active, not as a face-saving exercise. Pakistan has said it expects to host a second round of U.S.-Iran talks. It has not announced a date. The Lebanon ceasefire removes the condition that Iran said must be fulfilled before serious negotiations could resume. Whether Pakistan can produce a second meeting before April 21st is the racing clock question that nobody can answer with certainty. The internal Iranian divisions over how to respond to these developments are visible in the contradictory signals coming from different parts of the Iranian system. A newly appointed military advisor to Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei said publicly that he does not support extending the ceasefire. This is the hardline IRGC position: do not make deals, reconstitute military capability during the pause, prepare to fight again. Against this position stands the pragmatist track, the track that includes Aragchi and the back-channel enrichment offer of a 5-year pause, which represents the Iranian diplomatic establishment's view that the economic damage is now severe enough to require a negotiated exit. The ceasefire that expires on April 21st is not just a deadline for the United States. It is a deadline for the internal resolution of this Iranian debate. If the hardliners prevail and Iran refuses to engage in a second round of talks before April 21st, the ceasefire ends, the blockade tightens, the bombs return, and a war that has already killed thousands enters its most destructive phase yet. If the pragmatists prevail and a second meeting occurs before the deadline, the shape of any deal becomes visible for the first time. 5 years of enrichment suspension, coordinated straight access, a sanctions framework. These are pieces that, if assembled, could produce an agreement. Not a perfect agreement. Not a permanent agreement, but an agreement. The Lebanon ceasefire did not end this war, but it removed the excuse that Iran said was preventing it from making the concessions that could produce a deal. What Iran does with the absence of that excuse in the next 4 days is the only story that matters. Here's where everything stands tonight, April 17th, 2026. 4 days remain before the ceasefire expires. Trump has said the war is very close to over. Hegseth has said the blockade will continue for as long as it takes. General Kaney has said U.S. forces can expand interceptions into the Pacific. Iran has offered 5 years of enrichment suspension through back channels. Lebanon stopped burning at 5 p.m. yesterday. Field Marshal Munir was welcomed in Tehran by Aragchi himself. And Pakistan is waiting to host a second round of talks that has not yet been scheduled. The Lebanon ceasefire removed the wall. Whether Iran walks through the opening it created or whether the hardliners inside Tehran slam it shut before the pragmatists can reach the table, that is what the next 96 hours will reveal. I do not have a clean prediction for you tonight. I am not sure anyone does. What I can tell you is that the diplomatic environment is more open than it has been at any point since February 28th. And 4 days is enough time for either a breakthrough or a catastrophe. BBU News will be here for every development as it happens. Subscribe right now if you haven't. Turn on notifications. Because the next 4 days will move faster than any news cycle can keep up with, and you need to be here when this breaks. Tell me in the comments, now that Lebanon has paused and Iran has signaled willingness to discuss enrichment levels, do you believe a second round of talks happens before April 21st? Or does Iran's hardliner faction kill the diplomatic window before it opens? I read every comment. I'm Caitlin Collins. This is BBU News. Good night.